Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's event. My name is Rachel and I'm a marketing coordinator here at Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com or by following us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. In the coming days, we're looking forward to welcoming former Congresswoman Katie Hill on September 28th to discuss her book, She Will Rise. Tonight, we're honored to welcome Elisa Gabbert, Samantha Irby, and Sarah Rose Etter. Elisa Gabbert is the author of the poetry collections Blurred Blue, The Self-Unstable, and The French Exit. Her debut collection of essays, The Word Pretty, was published in 2018. The Self-Unstable was chosen by The New Yorker as one of the best books of 2013. Her work has appeared in The New Yorker, Boston Review, The Paris Review Daily, Pacific Standard, Guernica, The Owl, Electric Literature, The Harvard Review, and many other venues. She lives in Denver. Her new book, The Unreality of Memory, is a literary guide to life in the pre-apocalypse or current apocalypse, collecting Elisa Gabbert's profound and prophetic essays on the internet's age, media-saturated disaster coverage, and our addiction to viewing and discussing the world's ills. Gabbert is joined in conversation tonight by Samantha Irby and Sarah Rose Etter. Samantha Irby is the author of the acclaimed essay collections Meaty, the New York Times bestseller We Are Never Meeting in Real Life, and Wow, No Thank You. Based in Kalamazoo, Michigan, she writes the blog Bitches Gotta Eat and the newsletter Who's on Judge Mathis Today. Sarah Rose Etter is the author of Tongue Party and The Book of X, her debut novel, which won the 2019 Shirley Jackson Novel Award. The Book of X was also longlisted for the Believer Book Award and the Golden Poppy Award and was named a Best Book of 2019 by Thrillist, BuzzFeed, and Vulture. This evening's event will also include a Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. And if someone has typed a question that you'd also like to know the answer to, please consider upvoting that particular question. And most importantly, please consider supporting tonight's authors and Powell's by purchasing a copy of their books. A link to buy their books will be shared in the chat throughout the evening. And without any further ado, please welcome Elisa, Samantha, and Sarah.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Powell's. I've been really looking forward to this. You're two writers that I really admire, two people that I really enjoy, and I'm really excited for the conversation part of the evening. I am gonna start with a short reading. If you'll indulge me, this is my last event. It'll be, maybe 5 minutes. So this is my book. I also want to say, Sarah pointed this out earlier, and she said that she heard a lot of people were going to protest first and then come to this event. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who is protesting tonight and protesting this year. I haven't always had the strength to get out on the streets and protest. So those of you who are, I really appreciate you. Okay. Thank you for coming. If you're in Portland, hi. If you're anywhere else in the world, hi. I'm going to read the first couple of short sections from a long essay called Witches and Whiplash, which is about, it's about like psychosomatic illnesses that people think aren't quote unquote real. You're gonna probably see me do some quote marks. I just want you to know when I'm creating distance from the words that people use about these illnesses. It's also about mass hysteria and kind of crowd panic and crowd dynamics and a lot of stuff that feels very relevant these days. All right, Witches and Whiplash. On classical hysteria. Before the 20th century, it was common for women to suddenly lose the use of their lower limbs. They became unable to stand up and walk. This was called astasia abasia, and as a result, they were forced to remain in bed. It was also common to experience the feeling of a ball rising up from the abdomen and into the throat. This was called globus hystericus because it was thought to involve some kind of displacement or malfunction of the uterus. The sensation often led to hysteric fits or vapors or fits of the mother, the womb. Fits were usually characterized by pseudo-epileptic fainting and writhing about, as Edward Shorter puts it in his History of Psychosomatic Illness. In fits, Shorter explains, motor activity is apparently out of control, the limbs twitching histrionically, the eyes turned back, and the head. but the term was also used to describe a fashionable reigning distemper, for example, throwing teacups into the fire. The French physician Jean-Martin Charcot believed hysteria was a legitimate, inherited, and functional disease of the nervous system, an incurable condition whose symptoms included the aforementioned fits, or la grande hystérie. Patients in Charcot's clinic went through a familiar set of phases. First, they displayed the basic fits. Second, these would evolve into grander, more balletic movements. They'd leap around the room or contort themselves into improbable positions, arching their backs to the point that only head and heels touched the ground. This stage was known as clownism. Third, they would enter a period of impassioned poses, such as prayer and crucifixion. The fourth, or terminal phase, was wild and unpredictable and might include any of the previous symptoms as well as demonic behavior. These women were oddly accepting of the hysteria diagnosis. Doctors called their unaffected composure while describing their own symptoms la belle indifférence, a beautiful flatness. Hysteria is not a real disease, but patients learn these particular symptoms from accounts in the press as well as stories and novels about hysteria, which were popular in the late 19th century. This is not to say they were consciously performing the symptoms. However, when Charcot's theories were discredited, when the views of doctors such as Pierre Genet, who called hysteria a maladie mentale of the highly suggestible, came into favor, the specific condition became much less common. Hysterical paralysis and fits were no longer part of the symptom pool in Shorter's terms. The symptoms made available to the unconscious by way of being taken seriously in the medical community. According to Shorter, patients didn't want to be seen as fakers or, worse, crazy. Once hysterical symptoms were believed to be all in your head, women stopped producing them. The Freudian conversion. The word hysteria has hardly been scrubbed from the language, but mental maladies of the highly suggestible are now more properly termed conversion disorder. The idea taken from Freud is that emotional stress or anxiety is unconsciously converted or sublimated into physical symptoms. These symptoms are often called psychogenic, originating in the mind, or psychosomatic, involving both the mind and body, as all illnesses do. Even a cold causes malaise, an uneasiness, or mild depression. Conversion disorder is culture-bound, in that the physical symptoms of stress manifest in different ways in different cultures. Shorter notes that patients' notions of disease tend to follow doctors' ideas, a kind of obedience. The relationship is reciprocal. Patients and doctors inform and influence each other. But notably, patients want to please doctors, not the other way around. There's a power imbalance. Some templates of sickness are available only to some cultures. Take, for example, Koro, a perception that one's sex organs are retracting, shrinking, or disappearing. It occurs most commonly in China and Southeast Asia, but has also been seen in Africa, where it's often interpreted as penis theft and blamed on witchcraft. Premenstrual syndrome, on the other hand, seems to occur only in Western cultures. This changeability in the presentation of illness is sometimes called pathoplasticity. But it's not just illness. Most, if not all, behavior is culture-bound. The 1969 book Drunken Comportment by Craig McAndrew and Roger B. Edgerton argues that while some results of alcohol, like clumsiness, are universal, drunken changes for the worse differ greatly in different societies and eras. The sociologist Robin Room writes that whether or not alcohol is banalized in a society or saved for special occasions affects alcohol's excuse value. In Anglo-American and similar societies, drunkenness has some excuse value, but it is not a very good excuse. In other societies, intoxicated bad behavior is likened to possession by spirits. At one point, cultural ideas of disease spread primarily through word of mouth. Now the media plays a large role. Bulimia was unheard of before 1972, when a woman, a kind of patient zero, checked herself into a London clinic. The psychiatrist who treated her found her symptoms to be unique. In 1980, bulimia nervosa was included in the 3rd edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Several women's magazines published stories about the new binging and purging disorder, and then it spread like an epidemic. It was as though it had never occurred to women that they could eat as much as they wanted if they simply threw it up. Another example, Morgellons disease, is thought to have spread in part through the internet. It was discovered, you could say, by a woman named Mary Leitao, whose 2-year-old son had a rash inside his lips. Local pediatricians diagnosed it as eczema or atypical scabies, but it wasn't getting better. One day, as she was rubbing her son's prescribed cream on the rash, Leitao noticed something fiber-like emerging from his skin, according to a story in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Leitao, a biologist, looked at the colored fibers under an $8 Radio Shack microscope and was chilled. Leitao and her husband, an internist, decided their son had an unknown condition. They named it Morgellons after a description found in Sir Thomas Browne's A Letter to a Friend, published in 1690. Hairs which have most amused me have not been in the face or head, but on the back, and not in men, but children, as I long ago observed in that endemial distemper of little children in Languedoc, called the Morgellons, wherein they critically break out with harsh hairs on their backs, which takes off the unquiet symptoms of the disease and delivers them from coughs and convulsions. People who have or believe they have Morgellons complain of having itching or crawling sensations, as if of bugs under their skin, and of finding fibrous materials like bits of string or foreign hairs in their sores. They often arrive at a doctor's office with a container of collected evidence. This is known as the matchbox sign or the Ziploc sign. The condition is often described as controversial and unexplained. The official position of the CDC is that it's a form of delusional parasitosis, a fixed but unverifiable belief that something has invaded your body. Conversion disorders are fraught not only because they are cultural, just describing a culture-bound syndrome can feel insensitive, but also because conversion is sometimes a last-ditch diagnosis when a real illness, conversion disorder is real, is not understood. When reading case histories of hysteria, it is very difficult to know if any given case was truly psychogenic. Some women who were believed at the time to have hysterical paralysis or fits quite probably had multiple sclerosis or epilepsy. And globus hystericus, or the vapors, which might involve belching, vomiting, back pain, lightheadedness, and fainting, sounds very much like a side effect of wearing corsets. As the etymology suggests, hysteria was overwhelmingly a woman's disease. Why was it always women and girls? One view is that women are more susceptible to conversion disorders because they're more suggestible than men. Another is that women have more emotional pain to convert. I'll stop there.
Okay, I had to remember to unmute myself so I could ask you questions. That was incredible. And my first question, I'm gonna ask dumb questions and Sarah will ask smart ones, but my first question is, I do zero research. I mean, aside from maybe like a quick Google to see like what year a television show I'm about to reference came on. And I wonder, like, what is the research process like? And maybe I should ask this part first. How do you decide what you are going to write about and like dive into and research?
Well, first I want to say that like I really enjoy writing totally unresearched essays as well. And like that's really sort of my comfort zone, and I've sort of been trying to get back into that because it's so much more sort of pure and fun in a way. But when I do write a really researched essay, it usually starts with just some kind of like, I just saw a link on Twitter or something that caught my eye, some story that just like, there was some fact in it that like made my mouth drop open. And I ended up falling down like a Wikipedia rabbit hole for a couple hours, just like, oh my God, what? And that's usually when I feel like, oh, maybe I want to write about this. But sometimes that's just like a nagging thought at the back of my mind for weeks or months or even years. And like, I'll just kind of slowly accrue enough material like fibers in a matchbox that suddenly I'm like, oh, okay, now I really want to write about this. And then I'll kind of switch into a different mode where I'm literally thinking like, I'm working on an essay about X. And usually if there wasn't a plague on, what I would do at that point is like go to the library and get a whole bunch of books. And what I try to do is like, not just sort of get the kind of most famous and especially not the most literary books on a subject, because I kind of feel like if somebody who's smarter than me has already thought about it a lot, like what do I have to add? I kind of want more like source material, like academic journals or even kind of like self-published amateur type material that's just like information that I can kind of absorb completely and then have hopefully some new ideas about. So that part is really, really fun for me, just kind of surrounding myself with material and watching YouTube videos or like documentaries that I can find online, just kind of like as much as I can find. And when I'm in that mode, everything always seems relevant to whatever it is I'm researching. So it's like after a while, I'm not even trying. It's every single thing I'm reading, I'm like, oh, that's relevant to my topic. I got to put it in the notes. So I find that part really, really fun. But yeah, it is a little bit dependent on the library. It's harder to do now that I haven't been going to libraries much.
Yeah. Yeah. How did you research this one? Did you do like all the library stuff and?
Yeah, all the library stuff. I would tend to get like a whole stack of books and just kind of pile them on the table next to me and sort of go through them and fill them with sticky tabs. And I usually have like a Word document open when I'm working on something that like when I'm reading a book, I'm just reading it with like next to my laptop so I can like type up my notes. And I have to be real methodical because I'm so afraid of unconscious plagiarism. Like I heard about somebody getting sued for unconscious plagiarism when I was in grad school, and I've been afraid of it forever. So whenever I write something down in my notes,
nightmare is like accidentally like writing the way someone else talks or like saying something someone else has said and being like, did I write that joke or did Twitter write that joke?
Yes. And like, yeah, and I don't have like a research assistant. Like I'm not that fancy. So I always like when I type a quote from a book, I always put quotation marks around it and like mark the page number so that I can check it again. Even if I return it to the library, I can like go to Google Books and check it. And sometimes I'm so paranoid that sometimes if like a sentence of mine sounds like so good that it feels familiar, you know, when you have like a sentence like that where you're like, wait, have I read this somewhere before? There's no way that came from my own mind. I'll like Google it to see if I've accidentally stolen it from somebody.
I was going to ask about the fact checking process, and it sounds like you're so thorough that that might have been easier, but did you have to go through that? And kind of what did that look like? Because I know
Yeah, so a lot of these essays, more than not, were published somewhere before they were in the book. And so they mostly went through sort of like a double editing and fact checking process because they were then again edited when they were going in the book and then again fact checked. So I feel like, you know, reasonably safe that I didn't totally make anything up. That's like a scary responsibility. But I mean, you too probably know that, I mean, I feel like the fact checking process varies widely by publication. Like some people don't really do it at all, or it's kind of something that the editors do implicitly, but they don't like go through super systematically. If you write for like the New York Times Magazine, they're so systematic, it's wild. It's like you would not, some of the things that they fact check, you would not think would ever have to be fact checked. So I found that process
before where I get fact checks on, you know, like dumb jokes I've made.
Yes.
And I'm like, you understand this is a pop culture reference, right? Like I made an allusion to Lifetime movies and the fact checker was like, you know, in the time period you're referencing, Lifetime movies weren't a thing. And I was like, it's a joke, man, but I appreciate it. Nothing is more humiliating than the fact-checking process when like you have to explain to some faceless person you'll maybe never meet like what what you meant and why you're right. So no, I feel that the humiliation of fact checking is
True.
It's brutal. It's brutal. They made me fact check my book and it's fiction. And I was like, this is, I mean, it's smart and it was good, but yeah, I was like, what's the line?
Yeah, I found out recently that the New Yorker fact checks poems. That blows my mind. Poems.
Yeah, crazy. Yeah. I did have another question, which is that all of your essays, which are obviously exquisite, and I really am so excited because you can really feel, and we'll talk about this in another question, like I can feel the poet in you, in the essayist in you. But I was really curious, they all seem to really center around this kind of, I would say like a modern dread, right? Like we're with a lot of concern and fear about the future, and we're looking at things like climate change and plagues, and it's like, and the apocalypse and the end of the world. And I was just so curious, you know, has that always been a vein that you were interested in exploring? Or is it something that just as you wrote, you realized it was really something that was top of mind? Or is it, you know, an effective doom scrolling? You know, I was just curious kind of how the book started and how it shaped into this kind of really beautiful mosaic of dread.
Thank you. No, I do think like the past 4 years of my life have been just sort of unusually full of dread. Like, which is not to say that everything was great before. Like, it clearly wasn't. And like, you know, we've known about climate change for like many, many decades. But yeah, there just came to be like right around 2015, 2016, just this sort of overwhelming, pervading sense of, oh my God, not like now we've just really shit the bed. Like it's just like really too late for civilization. Like just this intense fatalism, which it's like, you know, in the Never-Ending Story, like what is it called? The Swamps of Sadness?
Yeah, I was like a baby watching that. It's haunted.
It's like
I've never seen the Never-Ending Story.
You know what? Honestly, it's too sad.
But no, I want you to watch it so we can talk about it. But so there's this part where like Atreyu and he's got his horse and they have to pass through, I think they're called the Swamps of Sadness, but it might be called the something else of sadness, like the sands of, I don't know. But like, it's just this landscape he has to cross. And if you succumb to the sadness, you're doomed. And Atreyu's like sad, but he's staying strong. And his like beloved horse, this is the really like the saddest part of the movie, his beloved horse gets depressed and just stops walking and starts sinking. And he's like trying to pull him out, screaming at him like, you have to fight it, but he can't. And I kind of feel like that's what, like, I want to say being online, but maybe it's just regular life too, because like being online is just part of regular life. I don't know. And especially now, it's very hard to escape being online all the time. It's very much like this, it's very hard to get out of that pit of despair and not feel very fatalistic. And just like the temptation to give up is just so overwhelming. So yeah, I just, you know, when Donald Trump was elected, my priorities completely changed. I've said this a couple of times in events, but just a little detail that I remember, we like threw away all of our New Yorkers that we hadn't read yet. We were like, well, like none of these matter anymore. It's a new world. You know, like it was almost like starting from scratch. And I remember like returning a bunch of unread library books because I was like, I want to read different stuff now. And I felt like I wanted to write different things. And I just had this urgency to write about kind of like the crises of the moment. But that said, I got really sick of that. Like I did, you know, over the past year, I've totally gone back to my sort of comfort zone of just like writing literary criticism and writing poetry. And I don't know that that's any less urgent. I don't know anything. I'm an idiot.
It's like, as a person who writes humor, there have been times, especially in this last year, that I have been like, man, does anyone like need this? Is this essential right now? Should I be, I mean, I'm never gonna write any like sort of like smart cultural criticism or anything, but should I be shining a light on people who write about actual smart things? And I think we need the other stuff. We need the poetry, we need the literature. I have definitely like stopped watching as much news because it's such a bummer, and trying to stay off Twitter and all that kind of stuff, because I feel like 5 minutes of it and I want to peel my skin off, I just am like, ugh, I'm done with this. So no, I totally understand. Like, in the beginning of the year, I was like, I'm going to read all of these political books. And then 2 months in, I was like, I am only going to read young adult romances that are soothing and have happy endings, because it's a lot. And I wanted to ask, like, while I was reading the book, and it's bad because I like to read at like 2 a.m., which is, the doom hour. I was wondering, like, while you were writing it, like, if you sort of like disconnect from the sadness to write, or like, how do you write about things that are so tough? Like the first essay about 9/11, like how we're, I think, far enough removed in time that it doesn't feel as visceral. But I was like, man, if I was steeped in this, like if I was researching, I would be like, ugh. And I wonder, like, does that happen to you when you just power through it, or are you like an actual professional who can study things and write about them without fucking falling apart?
I'm not a professional. Let's just get that straight. But I want to say, I think people need different things at different times, both as writers and readers. So like, sometimes I want to escape, and sometimes I want to go deeper into the shit. So yeah, like I feel like us following our own instincts and moods as writers is right, because we do the same kind of cyclical mood thing as readers as well. Mm-hmm. But yeah, weirdly, I mean, so a lot of people have told me it's a strange theme that they found my book like oddly soothing or oddly comforting. And I felt like that writing it too. And I think it's because, I mean, obviously, like, you can't research the future. Like, most of my research was about the past. So I was reading a lot of history, and sometimes like very deep history. I mean, sure, some of it was recent, like 9/11. But sometimes I was reading about the Titanic, or I was reading about like stuff that happened before humans were on Earth, like weird climate shit. And like, especially when you think on those kind of like geologic timescales, like it really makes you feel better, because you're just sort of like, my dumb little life does not matter.
Yeah.
It's like, I find that
very soothing.
very comforting.
About dinosaurs is like, okay, my shit doesn't matter,
But yeah, like the history thing was sort of doubly comforting, because like when you read about people who lived through the plague and like the 15th century, like their experience was oddly similar to ours, which is so beautiful. It's, like these plague journals are like, it's like you're reading somebody's blog from now, like they're like the same. But also it's just this, not to get all biblical about it, but it is this reminder, like, this too shall pass. Like, this sucks, but the past sucked too. Like, real bad, real bad.
And your research, like what comes through in the book, you're like, oh, we keep thinking that this is like a massive thing right now, but if you look at the scale of time and what everyone else has been through before us, it weirdly feels like we're part of a cycle that is kind of destined to keep happening. Like,
Yeah. Well, I think, part of the reason we feel so angry and offended, like, and we should, is because like we bought the narrative of progress, and like, we know that we know better than this. Like, we should be able to do better than this, because like people have been through it before, and there's just no reason that things like, well, it seems like there should be no reason that things couldn't get better, but like, yet history doesn't work that way. Like it just doesn't get better on a linear path.
Oh man, bought into the narrative of progress is I need that on a t-shirt.
Well,
So good.
question for both of you, and I think it's like a good one for all of us. You know, we're talking about people wanting to read different things at different times, but I think one thing we all have in common is writing, I would say like not happy books. And I was wondering if either of you, how you reconcile that, especially when it's like time to come to publication, and if you have any hesitation, because sometimes I look at the market and I'm like, you know, my dad used to be like, just sell out, like write a movie that Cameron Diaz would star in, you know, why do you keep writing this like these fucked up things, you know? And so I was curious if that runs through either one of your minds too, because we all kind of end up in this kind of maybe doomy, dready place.
I'd love to hear Sam's answer. Yeah.
Well, okay. I would say that if I were to write about like happy things, it would have to be about something other than myself. And so far, I have not really written any like fiction. I think like I would really have to like lobotomize myself in order to like see myself through a lens that was like positive, but it doesn't ever get me down because it just like feels like who I am. You know what I mean? I feel like if I tried to write a thing that was like, you know what, we're gonna talk about the sunny side of this, I would like try to write and not be able to, you know? So I am a doom and gloom, scared of everything, pessimist, but like it feels comfortable to me. I don't know any other way to be, so it doesn't bum me out because I'm like, well, this is just my faulty wiring. But there is a part of me that is like, you know, if I just wrote like a love story, I wonder how that would go. But I don't even know that I could create a protagonist that was happy. I'm like, what does it feel like to be a happy I would just be guessing as to what they feel like. I'd rather it feel authentic, i.e. terrible.
Sometimes I see like a woman on the street and she's like clearly going to yoga and has a green juice, and I'm like, what is in her mind? Like,
I know. There's a part of me that wants to be her. Like, I love her and want to talk to her and I want to be her, but like, you know, it's too late. Like, I'm 40. What am I going to do? Rewire the whole? No, I can't do it. What about you two?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I feel like during my day job when I'm in meetings, I have this sense that like everybody else is like adjusted to this shit. Like they're all like, all right, you know, fine, there's a plague on. Like we're working around it. It's no big deal. And I'm the only one who's still like, I'm still like exhausted and depressed and like don't know how to get through the day. So that's weird. But yeah, I kind of related to the book thing, it does feel to me like it's sort of a fool's game to try to like predict what people are going to want to read by the time your book comes out, because that's so
impossible.
Yeah, like just you don't know how long it's going to take for you to finish it, for your agent to read it, for somebody to want to publish it, for it to go through editing and publication, and then they decide like now's the right time. Like all of that is so wildly unpredictable, and not to mention the fact that everything that's happening in the world is wildly unpredictable. So, I mean, I remember that when my editor bought my book, he said like, oh, this will stay relevant in the right ways. Obviously it did, because it's about disasters, and like disasters are not going to stop happening anytime soon. The weird coincidence is that it came out in a plague year and there's an essay about the plague.
I mean,
you said you have the future, and I'm like, actually, I was going to ask you, like, your book feels very prescient. It almost feels like you were dialed into something, and I wonder how you reconcile this piece that you made with it. I don't want to say the word coming true, but I mean, like, it was sort of like reading a crystal ball.
Yeah, like, are you psychic for real?
The thing is, like, people who study pandemics have been saying like this is going to happen sometime forever. So it's kind of like the Seattle earthquake. Like it's gonna happen sometime, or like whatever, the next big one in California. So like if somebody writes a book about an earthquake in the next 20 years, probably a lot of people are like, somebody's gonna have a book that comes out the same year that like the earthquake hits, and it's gonna feel like they were psychic, but it's more just like, well, we knew this was coming, it was just a matter of when. But I'm as shocked as anyone that it happened this year, like just, and like totally unprepared. Sarah, I remember you like sending me links and being like, in January or whatever, like, are you worried about this? This seems worrisome. And I was like,
well, that was when I was listening to like NPR, and they were like, there's this weird, you know, sickness, and people are getting like really sick, and you know, the streets are empty. And I remember being like, I wonder if we should be worried about this. And it's just,
and you were right. But I was just sort of doing the same thing that everybody always does, which is what I say in my book, which is you always think it's not going to happen to you. And so it's just like, it's just another flu panic, you know, like, well, I totally dismissed it.
Yeah. Well, besides you being psychic, I did have one technical question. Your poetry is amazing, and I was curious how that influences the way in which you write essays, because there is this sort of, you end every essay with this like closing sentence that goes somewhere that I wasn't really expecting you to, and it like wraps everything up so beautifully. And I was just really curious kind of how being a poet plays into the way that you wrote these essays.
Oh yeah, so I'm glad you asked that, because like people have been asking me that over the past, you know, 6 weeks or whatever. And I used to have this resistance to the question in a way. Like I kind of thought like don't belittle me that I can't just write in 2 different genres and like be completely different in them. Like what makes you so sure that like I have to be all poety when I'm writing an essay, you know, like, but the more that I didn't say that because that would be insulting. So I, like every single time I'm asked, I actually kind of think about it and try to come up with an answer. And like, actually I keep having all these new interesting ideas about different ways that being a poet does inform my prose and vice versa, that like I never really thought about consciously before. So like, it turns out it's a good question. But yeah, and I've actually been thinking about it like today and over the past week, because I think like the 3 of us together might have seemed like an odd grouping maybe to some people. I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe that's me projecting, but I think that both of you write prose that feels a little bit like the way a poet writes prose. And so, but in different ways. So Sarah, I think you write fiction in kind of like a fragmentary way where like, that, I mean, poets love fragments, right? So like, I'm sure you've heard that before, but also like your sentences are like so exacting, and like the sound, you know, the sonic quality of them, they're very rhythmic. It has that kind of feeling of like, almost like you're doing scansion for your paragraphs. And Sam, your essays, I think have that same kind of like leap between paragraphs that like I like about poets' essays, where they sort of eschew the kind of standard type of transition where they like, the move is surprise, as opposed to like, well, this is where I expected I was going. It's like, look, this is where I'm going, bitch, keep up. Like, and I love that.
All the way over here, sorry.
No, and I love that. Like that's something that I really have always valued in prose, and it only recently has occurred to me that like, oh, that's kind of a poetic mindset to take that kind of like, in a poem they would call it the lyric leap. It's like a yeah, you're like you're moving based on like an association, and you're not explaining the association, and people just have to follow you. And I think that's really beautiful in prose, just as it is in poetry. So yeah, I think being a poet teaches you how to write surprise, and it teaches you how to pay attention to the very small effects of the sentence, the phrase, the clause, the punctuation mark, the tiny things that still matter even when there's like a lot more words on the page and in the book than in a book.
I was going to say your essays are, I'm not someone who like, I'm not reading like a ton of, you know, scholarly articles and, you know, whatever. But they're very melodic, and that was something that was really interesting to me, that you were able to take facts and cast them in a way that feels very, like I said, melodic. it feels like you're drawn to facts that are written very richly, and the way that you assemble them feels very poetic, like you're pulling things in together in a way that's almost collage-like. So that, I don't know, those things just kind of jumped out to me about your work, and I think that's what made it such a wonderful book to read, even with the dread and everything. It was easy to follow you because you
That's
kind
how
of
I feel about your
that
novel, that kind of like the collage is like, is melodic. But yeah, and I like that you said that, because I also think of essays in terms of like movements instead of sections. Like that's always how I phrase it in my mind for some reason. Like when I'm thinking about the structure, I think, well, this is the first movement, and this is the second movement, and this is the third movement, you know, like it's a symphony.
Oh, that's nice. I'm gonna steal that.
Please do.
We're supposed to we're gonna do questions soon, but I have one last question, which is just like me being a nerd. There's one essay that you wrote that's different from the rest in the book, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you arrived to the structure of Witches and Whiplash. Like why did you want to set that one off and make it different from everything else? And then I'll be quiet.
Yeah, so basically that was one of the last essays I wrote. That's the one that I read from tonight. So those were just the first 2 sections. I think there's maybe 10 or 12 total sections in that essay. It's the longest one in the book, and it's kind of right in the middle. And I think I had originally conceived that as 2 essays, like when I wrote my book proposal, and then I ended up deciding to make it 1 essay. And I just had way too much material. So like that research process I was talking about earlier, I just went into overdrive, and it was partly that I was like getting close to my deadline, and I don't like asking for extensions, and I really wanted to finish. And so I just like went into this manic phase, and I wasn't sleeping. I almost called that essay Manic Panic.
Is that? That was my
And yeah, I just had so much material, and like there's a little coda at the end of the essay where I talk about like all the kind of loose threads that I wasn't able to include. But essentially I didn't know how to organize it, because I had gotten into this kind of almost like a habitual pattern of how I was writing the essays, where like I did a certain amount of research, and I was planning to write like an essay of a certain length, and I could see the movements by the time I was ready to write it, and it all sort of made sense to me. But with that one, I was like, I have too much, I can't see it, I can't see the movements, I just don't know what to do. And so one of the books that I had been reading as research was Crowds and Power, which is an amazing book. I really strongly recommend it. And it's organized into these short little sections, like fragments. It's a really long book, but it's like in these little fragments, they each have little titles. and I love like a little title. So I was like, ooh, what if I organize this essay into little sections with little titles? And I even kind of thought, well, maybe in the end, I'll remove the titles. Those will just be for me, so I like understand. So I can understand the structure while I'm writing it. But I ended up keeping them in as a little nod to my guy Canetti, because I love that book so much. But yeah, I totally ripped off the structure from him, and like it really helped me.
I have to say too, I was really glad that that's what you read tonight. That's one of my favorite pieces, and it feels so relevant. Just hearing like what women went through, and honestly, anyone who is not a man trying to get medical treatment or medical care in any fashion is so important. So I was just
good luck.
Yeah, there's a long section about like the witch craze in Europe and in Salem when they were you know, hanging witches. So if you're into witches, that's also in that essay.
Okay, I'm gonna read from the Q&A.
Oh, is it time for Q&A?
It is.
Because I have more questions. My next question was going to be, is it hopeless?
We'll save that for the end if we still have time.
Yeah,
to leave people on a cliffhanger.
That'll be our last question. Okay. Let's see. Anonymous attendee wants to know, what was the name of that cloud book you recommend, Elisa?
Oh, Crowd, right?
I think they put it in the chat.
It's in the chat. Yeah. Crowds and Power by Elisa Gabbert. That's great.
Okay, do you want me to ask
from Powell's
anonymous Q&A question?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Well, Tom McAllister of Philly.
Tom! Hi, Tom! Hello, Tom.
Tom, we see you. Related to the poetry conversation, when you're revising, are you primarily focused on language, content, structure, or something else? It's a good question.
In the revision process?
In the revision process.
You know, I really try to do as much thinking about the writing like ahead of time, like in the kind of preparatory part of the writing, that I have to revise as little as possible because I hate revising.
Really?
Yeah, because it's like, I mean, with an essay in particular, it's so much about sort of my mood over a certain amount of time. So like my least favorite thing is when I write an essay and then I have to edit it like months after I've written it, because like that's when the editor got to it or whatever, because I'm like, I can't get back into that mindset. Like, and I'll find that I'm just, if I try to like add material, I'm just repeating myself, and yeah, it's really hard for me. So I try to do all of that stuff basically at the same time, like thinking about, you know, the argument, is there anything missing? Do the sentences sound good? Like I basically try to do everything at once, like within the same week that I write the essay.
You know what's fascinating? I have a friend who says that when you write a novel, a portal opens in your brain, and after you it closes and you can never get back in there. And so that sounds very similar to what you're doing for each essay. It's like this space opens up in your head and you have to get as much of it out as you can, because you can't get back.
Yeah, I can't. It's almost like it stops making sense to me, but I sort of trust my past self more than I trust my present self in a way, where I'm like, even if I don't completely follow my own argument anymore, like I know my past self like got it right. And like, I'm just gonna come in and like meddle with it like some middle manager. Like,
that's incredible, because I am the exact opposite. I hate reading anything old because I just feel like embarrassed, like, oh, that could have been better, I should have said that. And usually I don't read it until like it's too late to fix it. So then I'm just like, ugh. Bleh, I should edit while writing, but I don't. So that's interesting that like you read your old stuff and you think like that person knew, because I always think, oh, that person was asleep when she wrote that. How on earth did this get turned in?
I mean, I don't want to give the impression that I never like hate my old writing, because I do. Like certainly I got to the point with this book, you know, where you have to do your like first and last passes where you're just like, oh my God, why did I think it was a good idea to write a book and publish it and let people read it? I hate everything about myself. Yeah.
This is blowing my mind though, because I edited like 150 times. Audibly.
I could not.
Oh, Sarah, you froze.
I never know if it's like the other person.
I know.
So I just like,
You're back.
Okay.
There was an uncanny moment.
I was gonna say, I edited like 57 times. I couldn't stop. They had to like pull it out of my hands.
I'll do that, but I get to a point where I'm like changing one word or like one punctuation mark. I don't make crazy edits at the end. I really don't.
I should be more like you.
Yeah,
or
I
not.
type it in and they send it back to me and I read it one more time and that's it. I'm like, what? If it makes sense to you, it's going in.
That's actually a question I was gonna ask you, Sam. I was curious because I love the sort of like, it reminds me of my last book, The Word Pretty, which was like a lot more kind of casual, low stakes, like off the cuff kind of writing. And but I published it with a small press, and so they were not like, it didn't go through a billion passes. And but I wonder though, when you're on a major press and you're a New York Times bestseller, like did you have to fight for them not to change your voice at all? Like did they ever try to kind of polish it too much?
No, and like my editor I've had the same editor for the last couple of books, and she is so nice. I mean, they truly are like, they say like, this doesn't make sense, like if I've left a word out or if they don't get a reference, like if I use a colloquialism that they don't get, she'll be like, what does that mean? And I'm like, don't worry, Black people get it, or you know, whatever. Yeah. But like, she doesn't try to like polish it at all.
Good.
If I am not making the point I think I'm making, or if I'm like getting there a weird way, she'll say, hey, what are you doing? But no, they never try. Like all of my run-on sentences, we like occasionally will go back and forth about like when I absolutely need to use a period. But other than that, she kind of like lets me do what I do.
That's great.
Which means I can't blame her when people are like, what? I'm like, no, it was me. It wasn't them, it was me. Like,
No,
I messed that up and they let me leave it in, so.
I'm really glad to hear that, because I think that a lot of times you have to really fight to have style, you know, because like when you go through a lot of rounds of editing, there's this tendency to sort of make everybody sound the same, and like you can lose that voice.
Like I turn it in, she sends it back, I read it, and it goes back to her, and that's it. Like I just want it away from me. I get so embarrassed. I just want it away from me. So I'm like, yeah, whatever you want to change, fine. I don't want to read it ever again.
We have more Q&As.
Yeah, there's some good ones in here. I just opened it.
Okay, so we want to know, this got upvoted a lot. What are your recommendations for a soothing pandemic read? And I'd like this one to be a little bit of a round table, because I bet, Sam, you probably have some ideas too.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it depends like on what soothes you, but I okay, all right. I have two things that I just read. I just read The Dutch House by Anne Patchett. And like the cover, I was like, whoa, what is this? Like, I don't want to read about some old house, but it's not about the house. It's good as hell. It's very soothing. It's like family drama. Right. And then I just reread Emergency Contact by Mary H.K. Choi, which is YA kind of modern romance, like not romance. And it's incredible. I've read it like 3 times. That is very soothing. Happy ending, the whole bit.
Nice.
Yeah.
Great. You're next, Lisa. You got to do it.
I am going to recommend Via Negativa by Daniel Hornsby. This is a novel that I read very early on in kind of like pandemic lockdown mode. I got a galley of it, and it's a short novel. It's really intimate. It's like a first person, and it's written in this kind of like dispatch tense where it's almost like he's like recounting the day's events each night. So it's like almost present tense, almost past tense. I thought that was really interesting. It just felt really like, you know, that kind of intimacy of a journal, and it's really funny, but really profound. The character is like an old retired priest kind of thinking he's on this journey to visit some friends, but he's also like thinking back over his whole life, which is a mode that I love. Like I love elderly people thinking about their whole lives. That's just like that's one of my favorite genres. So it's great. Via Negativa, Dan Hornsby. I love that book.
Awesome. I have 2. You actually told me to read The Summer Book by Tove Jackson. That was amazing.
That's another old person book.
It's like they're hanging out on an island. There's flowers blooming. It's like summertime. It's really good. That's very soothing for right now. And then this one is not out yet, but if you are interested in pre-ordering, Milk Fed by Melissa Broder.
Oh, yes.
It took me out of all this shit that's happening right now and just put me in a completely different world of like frozen yogurt and like love between 2 women and spirituality. And it completely, what a palate cleanser. I was like, oh, I'm not in America anymore. I'm somewhere else, which was really, really nice.
It's so good. I love her. Everything she writes.
Yeah. So those are my 2. I think we have more. Hold on. So
can I answer the audiobook question? I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
Yeah. So I would like to hear from you 2 on this too. I had very little role. So the audio rights sold, and they didn't like offer me to read it.
Really?
And I don't know if that's because it was kind of early in pandemic lockdown. And so they might have felt like, oh, she's not gonna have a way to get to a studio or whatever. I've heard that now authors are like locking themselves in closets with a bunch of pillows and they're making it work. But I got like narrator approval.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I don't know, I've never done this before. She sounds good. And she does sound good. But I do think it's tricky. Like, I would have loved to read it myself, but I find these essays very hard to read out loud for the very reason that this person, Lucas, asked, because like there's all these quotes, and it's kind of hard to sort of modulate your voice in a way that people know that you're reading a quote. And sometimes when I'm reading out loud, I'm like, well, I guess it doesn't matter if they know if that's a quote or not. But other times I think it does. And my favorite is when I'm reading something like that, that Sir Thomas Browne letter about Morgellons, where, you know, he writes in that like old timey, like all the nouns are capitalized. So it's very easy to like put on a silly voice when I'm doing it. And I think people know when I'm done reading it, but otherwise I'm never entirely sure how to signal. And like, I listen to a lot of podcasts. So like the Guardian Long Read is one where they're just reading an article and there's often quotes. And I try to pay attention to the way the narrators like modulate their voice when they're reading a quote. But it's tricky. So I think that like it kind of requires some training and practice, and I would like to do it someday, but yeah, I didn't get to read my audiobook. I've only listened to small parts of it. It does sort of make me feel weird to hear somebody else reading like my essays, because like that's not necessarily the way I would read them. I think she does a good job, but like it also is just like, whoa, it's like uncanny.
I think it's less usual for a fiction writer to read their books. I had narrator approval too, and they sent over like 4 options and I picked one. But I feel the same way. I listen to it a little bit, but it makes me feel too weird. And I would love to read mine one day, but I hear that it's like, and Sam, the reason I jumped in is because I think you're going to be able to give a better answer to this. I've heard it's like a real skill to be able to read your book, like to be able to breathe properly on the microphone, and that it can take a really long time if you're not like, you know, you haven't done it before. But yeah, I had the very same experience that you did. So Sam, you're.
I record my own, and they lock you in a padded closet, and it's humiliating to read your words while people watch you and listen, and they can like hear your stomach growl and hear like, you know, if you fart in the booth, then everyone knows. I haven't, but I learned not to early. I record my books in like 2 days because I hate like being trapped there. I have been very lucky in that all 3 of my books had the same director. So her name's Kim, and we've gotten to know you're trapped with this person for days. We've gotten to know each other, and she knows, she knows me well enough to like know if I'm like struggling to breathe. That's a run-on sentence problem. And she knows, like, you know, I feel comfortable enough to be like, let me do that sentence over again. Let me say that again, or I sounded weird. But I never listen to my audiobooks after, like, I've never listened to any of them. So I don't know how they eventually turn out, but it is like horrible to be trapped with your words and several people like on the other side of glass, and like they have to follow along to make sure that you are saying exactly what you wrote, and you don't get, at least I didn't get to, I like to, if I do a performance or a reading, I like to jazz it up and like laugh a little, but they don't want that. So it's it took a little like learning, but now like Kim and I we're set.
You're saying there's no risk?
Terrible, but I know to like eat crackers so my stomach doesn't growl, and to take Sudafed so I don't get congested while I'm talking.
But not too many crackers so your mouth is dry.
Right.
Careful.
You know, the biggest thing for me is like I have to take Sudafed because when I talk for too long, my nasal passages get all clogged up. So I'm like a speed freak for 2 days, knocking that book out.
Oh, wow. I do actually want to have this experience someday. This is something I want to do before I die.
All right, another question. Two, one. It sounds like you, okay. What is your day job, Elisa? That you
Oh gosh, that's boring. I work at a software company. I am the director of content and SEO, so I manage a team and
oh my God, we have like the same job title.
I know, we have similar jobs. Yeah, it's wild.
I can't wait to
yeah, so I mean it uses like similar skills. Like I you know, I'm thinking about words and like brand voice. Like it's similar, but it feels like it's a totally separate thing. Like they don't.
I know what you mean. It feels like having two lives. I tell people that all the time. I'm like, I have two different lives. Michael Holtman, one of our favorite people, is here from San Francisco, and he says, I love listening to the three of you. Great conversation. One of the things that impresses me most about your essays is that they feel so right. It's hard to imagine them unfolding differently. Can you give an example of one of them that you had to blow up or reconfigure or re-envision completely or leave out of the book?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't exactly have an example of one that there was a cool sunset I had to look at. I don't have an example of one that I like wrote and then like sort of blew up in revision. Because I tend to do, again, like so much of, oh God, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna say it. It's like prevision. Sorry, that's terrible. I just try to figure it out beforehand, before I actually start writing, because I want to be able to focus on the sentences and stuff and feel like I know what I'm doing in terms of this is like the flow and the structure. But I think I mentioned like, you know, the Witches and Whiplash essay. I think that was originally supposed to be 2, and I decided to mash it up into 1 long essay. So that was kind of an experiment. That's like the longest essay I've ever written. And there might have been a couple of other essays that I like planned out in my proposal that ended up somehow getting like mashed up, or that I just decided to leave out entirely. But yeah, I don't know. I can't think of a time that I did a really radical revision of an essay. I'm like not that kind of a writer.
The reason I'm cracking up is I asked Mary Gateskill at an event this like exact same question, and you're being so generous, but she was just like, I don't believe in waste. And I was like, eviscerated everyone. It was just like the room stopped and everyone was like, is that girl okay? Because she just roasted her. But you did it in like a really generous, kind way. That like, I don't waste my time, I just do it.
Well, no, I hope that effect, I mean, maybe I have no control over it whatsoever, but I mean, I hope the effect is because I think about the structure a lot before I actually start writing. You know what I mean? To the point that like, yeah, there have been times where I kind of faced off with an editor where they suggested I try another structure, and I like genuinely gave it the old college try. And I was like, look, it's not going to work this way. And I explained why it wasn't going to work that way. And I was like, I can't reveal this information before this information.
Yeah.
So basically just like, there are times that I had to prove myself, like, look, I promise you I've already thought about this a lot. But yeah, I do like think about it a lot before I start writing. And so I hope that that's why it creates that effect.
I think we have time for one more question, but I'm actually going to make it 2. One is, Sam, how's your new dog doing?
Oh my God, he's bad as hell, but he's so cute. Kirsten was just out with him, and I just heard him running through the house. So he's cute and naughty, but he's good.
That's amazing. And then the last one that I have, okay, so there's a couple more about revision, but I think we kind of might have hit that. And then the last one is, have we ever participated in National Novel Writing Month just to get something down on paper? And the question is about whether or not, you know, how do we feel about having like a kind of set deadline of just like banging out a first draft? I would almost pull it out of the National Writing Month and just say like, you know, how do you get a first draft out?
I mean, a deadline is the only way I will ever get anything written. And like, I need someone to be mean and yell at me Sarah and I have the same meme.
I know who's yelling at you.
And he and I had a terse conversation yesterday because I'm a few weeks late on a thing. But I cannot, like, if it's left up to me, I would never write. I have no, like, I'm so passionate about this that I must get it done. I only write because there's someone who will yell at me if I don't.
Will yell at you and then pay you. I'm gonna answer next because I want to end on you.
Someone who would be like let down. I hate letting people down. So
I do too. Also, really quick, I really love your book, Elisa, and I'm so glad that we got to do this event with you.
Me too.
For me, no, I've never done National Writing Month, but since I have a full-time job, I have to be really, really smart about when I write and how I take advantage of the time. So usually it's like my last vacation, I just took off 8 days from work and I wrote the entire time so that I could finish a book. And so, you know, I think we need to have more conversations about, especially now, what it means to be employed and also be a writer. I feel like, you know, we kind of forget all the time, how do you make it happen? Like it is like I have 2 jobs and I don't regret that and I'm not upset about it, but it's really, really hard. And I'm lucky because I have an agent who will kind of call me and be like, well, hey, where are those pages? And that's enough for me to be like, holy fuck, I better put my ass in the chair. And one thing I've learned in the past 2 months is that if I write, you know, 1,000 words a day, I can have a novel pretty quick. And that is, you know, really helpful. So it doesn't have to be about a month per se, but it's more like if I set a word count goal every day and then I hit it, I have a novel much quicker than if I don't do anything and just keep watching Netflix and being sad. So that's that. I'm gonna kick it to you next to go.
There's a poetry version, actually. It's in April, NaPoWriMo, and I did do it once. Yeah, where people write a poem a day. So it's a little different, but yeah, usually it's you write a poem a day, and I did do it once, and I wrote a chapbook, and that was like my first chapbook. It was written all in April of 2015 or something. Yeah.
I didn't.
Yeah, but so I tend to write collections, not like novels. So I tend to think in terms of like the next unit that I'm trying to finish. So like right now I'm trying to finish a book of poems. So like my goal, which I don't always adhere to lately, has been like I'm trying to write a poem a week. But there have definitely been times where it was more like a poem a month because I was writing longer poems, and then I was like, this is taking too damn long. So I started writing shorter poems so I could write a poem a week. So I do kind of try to set little goals like that for myself to get things done. But yeah, I mean, like Sarah, I have this kind of full-time job it's 40 hours a week, and you know, mostly I write on the weekends. And I'll try to kind of be working on my writing a little bit at night during the week if I can, like just reading something that I feel like informs my writing or taking notes, jotting down ideas. But if I'm gonna like sit down and write an essay or a review or something, it's got to be on the weekend. And sometimes I take time off.
I wonder, like, were older writers doing this? I mean, I know some of them had jobs, but few.
You know, people used to get paid like the same amount for writing as we do, except rent was like $200 a month. See, like seriously, like Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes or whatever, they would get like $200 for publishing a poem, and that paid their rent for a month.
Could you imagine?
It blows my mind. It totally blows my mind.
I would be so good at that lifestyle where you're just lounging and writing and like occasionally drinking absinthe and like beers. You know what I mean? Like just really just doing whatever the fuck you want.
Oh God, yeah, I love it.
I think.
Hello. Well, thank you all so much. This was an amazing conversation. Someone in the Q&A was like, I hope, you know, this just goes on for hours and hours.
Well,
no.
Make that happen and you're going to be really upset in about another hour.
Fair. Well, thank you for joining us for tonight's event. It was a pleasure to host Elisa, Samantha, Sarah, and welcome all of you. please consider purchasing a copy of The Unreality of Memory by visiting us at powells.com. We look forward to seeing you at another one of our events again soon. Take care until then.
Thank you.
Bye, it was lovely.